Okay, so I want to begin really with the first question. Is everyone is clear on what is meant by the canon, right? The canon is the actual collection of books that we identify as being part of the Bible. So this article is going to talk about how our canon that we use today, how that actually came to exist. So at the very top, would someone go ahead and read where it says, when early Christians spoke of? When early Christians spoke of. Let's see. Roxy, could you read that for us? Where it says, when early Christians spoke of. Okay, all right, very good. So one of the first things you got to remember is that if you go back to the time of Jesus, there was no New Testament yet. Okay, none of the Gospels had been written. Most of the letters even hadn't been written by Paul. Okay, there really was no New Testament. If you had lived at the time of Jesus, there was really only what was in the Old Testament. Okay, that was it. So this article is going to talk about how that New Testament began to very gradually take form. Okay. Let me read into the second paragraph. It says, in the 4th century, after the Emperor Constantine's legal recognition of Christianity, the movement of formalizing doctrine and identifying a canon of sacred scripture gained momentum. So you remember we talked about Constantine last week? You remember the story about Constantine?
Yeah.
Won that battle, saw that vision, helped him win. He said, hey, I like this God. This is going to be my new religion. Well, when he became the ruler and became a Christian, he kind of had this attitude of, well, we need to know what our sacred writings are. Because, again, there wasn't really a New Testament at that time. So there was some pressure on church leaders to begin to try to identify what are the sacred writings of our church. Okay? All right. Well, there's two people we need to talk about here. And they're mentioned in your article. One of them is a guy named Eusebius, who was a bishop of the ancient city of Caesarea, and Athanasius, who was the bishop of the city of Alexandria. Okay? And it says here that both of them were instrumental in formalizing a New Testament canon. Again, an official collection of books. And it was actually Eusebius who came up with the guidelines for how to know whether a book is going to be in the Bible or whether it wasn't. Okay? So if you look on your paper, you'll see that we already actually have them listed. Okay? But we need to talk about them. So I'm going to pull them up one at a time, and then let's read through them. So can someone read number 1? This is the first criteria. This was the first question that they would ask when they were trying to figure out if something should be in or whether it should be left out. Sawyer, can you read that for us?
Was the author an apostle or a close companion of one?
Okay, that is the question. Was the author of this writing either an apostle or a close companion to one? So in other words, was it one of the original 12, or was it someone who knew one of the original 12? Now, why would that be an important question to answer? Why would that be an important question to answer? Let's see, Frankie?
Is there the people who are closest to Jesus when he was around?
Yeah, that's right. These people knew Jesus better than anybody else, okay? They were the ones who were there. They saw Jesus work miracles. They heard him preach. They saw everything. So who's going to know better about Jesus than people who actually knew him? So if they write something, we're going to say, well, it's got to be good stuff, right? Okay, first-hand material. Now, what if it was if it was Matthew or John? Okay, it's like they actually knew Jesus. But let's say it was someone who maybe just knew them, like it was a companion of John or a companion of St. Peter or Matthew. Well, I mean, that's still pretty good because they probably heard first-hand stories from them about Jesus. So their writings would probably be pretty significant as well. Okay? So they would always start with this question of who wrote this material? If it's an apostle or someone who knew an apostle, then it's probably going to be considered authentic and it's going to be accepted. Okay? But that's not the only question that you're going to ask. Okay? Let's take a look at the second question. Riley.
Was the book accepted at large among the Christian communities?
All right, that is the second one there. Was the book accepted at large among Christian communities? So what does that mean exactly? What does that mean? Kind of put that in your own words. See, Alex?
At like gatherings for Christians where they like accepted books.
Okay, so in Christian communities, places where Christians gathered together, were they reading this material? Okay, was it popular? Was it well known? Okay, you know, if Christians in Jerusalem are talking about a book, and then if you go up to Antioch, to their community where they gather, and they have that book, and then if you go down into Egypt and the Christians down there, they know of that book, you're like, hey, this book is common, okay, it's popular. Lots of different communities accept it. So it's going to increase the chances that it's legitimate material, okay? So we start with who wrote it, and now is it well known and is it accepted, okay? All right, let's get to the third one. Yes?
I have a question. So I was thinking when you were talking about number one, did more than one person have to have that knowledge also? So that, like if it was a story that they, or something that they said, was it confirmed like maybe other people also heard it, or was it?
I think actually that's what number two would be, is if that a writing, let's say, connected with an apostle, if several people were aware of that story, it would be probably more legitimate. Whereas if it just popped up in one place, it'd be like, well, how did that come about? So a lot of these actually connect together. The problem with number one, though, is the question, well, how do we know that John wrote that? Or how do we know that it was the real Peter? Or so, I mean, as we'll see, some of these questions are not as easy to answer as they look. But yeah, those kind of go together. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, number three. Someone read that one for us. It's right there on your paper. Graham.
Did the book contain doctrine consistent with orthodox teachings?
Okay, all right, so this gets into content. This gets into what's actually in the writings. Okay, now here's a word I want to make sure you know what it means. It's the word orthodox. It's basically saying here, is the material in these books, is it considered orthodox? Does anyone know what orthodox means? I bet a lot of you have heard the term ortho. You had an ortho appointment. Okay, maybe something to do with your mouth. Or if you injured your foot, you had an orthopedic surgeon appointment or doctor. Okay, do you know what ortho means?
Doesn't that mean like speaking or something? Like something?
Not quite. I think maybe you're thinking oral. Okay, which an oral surgeon, it has to do with your mouth. But in this case, ortho means correct. So if you have an orthodontist appointment, they're correcting your teeth. Okay, if your foot is broken, they're going to try to correct your foot. So that's what ortho means. And then the docs part means teaching. All right, so if some orthodox put those together, it means correct teaching. So for number three, they're going to look at a piece of writing and say, does that sound like something Jesus would teach? All right, is that consistent with what Christians in general believe? Or are there some things in it that would make you go, that doesn't sound like something he would say? Okay, so you get into the actual content. All right, and then the fourth and final one, and this one's kind of a rehash of the third one. Someone go ahead and read that for us from your paper. Let's see, Jordan, you can take that.
Did the book bear evidence of high moral and spiritual values?
Okay, which you can see. Kind of the same idea. Look at the content. What kind of values does it have? Does it seem to be moral? Does it seem to be spiritual? Is it the kind of things that we would associate with Jesus' teachings? Okay, you know, if it's talking about having multiple wives, it's like, well, that doesn't sound like the kind of thing Jesus would teach. Okay, if there was something kind of unusual about their belief about God, you would say, I don't know about this. Okay, so you look at all four of these. These were the guidelines that they were trying to use to make those decisions. Now, do you think that this solved all the problems? That everyone agreed exactly, yep, this book is in, yep, that book's out. You think everyone all agreed, nice and neat? No, not hardly. Okay, there was a lot of debate, a lot of disagreement, even when you would apply these standards. So if you look down in the second half of the article, it says debating the canon. Okay, so let's take a look there. It says, while it was Eusebius who helped develop the criteria for the canon, it was Athanasius, and he's the other guy that is on the screen there. He was the first person to actually use the term canon, so that official collection of books. And he actually was the first person to accept our 27-book canon. Okay? And you can see that it wasn't until the year 393 at a church council at a place called Hippo. Yes, there was a town called Hippo. Okay? I don't know if it's short for hippopotamus, but there was a city called Hippo. And in 393, they established the canon. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. That's almost 400 years after the time of Jesus. The church did not actually have an officially accepted canon of books until 4 centuries after Jesus. So you can imagine, in between, there was a lot of debate and a lot of probably agonizing over what goes in and what does not. Okay? Now, the best part of this article is the little chart down at the bottom. Okay? And on it, you'll see, of course, the 27 books, which, of course, everyone knows. And you'll even see there's a list of some other books that are there, okay, that are not in our Bible. All right? So you look down at the bottom. We'll talk about those a little bit later. Okay? Now, what I want you to pay your focus your attention on is look at the list at the top. There's some weird names of some people. And then you'll see on each column there are color-coded boxes. Okay? Now, here's the case with the color code. And I know it didn't print perfectly, all right, so I've tried to help you out here. The ones that are really dark, the really, really dark boxes, means that that person accepted that book. If you see a lighter box that has a letter R, that means they rejected it, meaning they said, nope, I don't think that book should be in. And then there's a lighter colored one that has a letter D in it, and that means disputed. Which means that person was like, I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe, maybe not. I'm not convinced. Okay? So those really are the 3 designations that I want you to understand. Either yes, accept it, no, reject it, or I'm not really sure. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at the first column, which is, it says Marcion. Now, Marcion was an early church father, as they called him. Now, he was a Christian. But he had some very unusual beliefs. Okay, in fact, some people called him a heretic. He had this idea that there actually were 2 gods. He said there was a God of the Old Testament, okay, who he said was really mean and always angry. Okay, and if you think about in the Old Testament, doesn't God sometimes kind of sound a little really mean and really angry? You know, where he strikes down and destroys a city of people? Where he tells the Israelites, go in and kill everybody. They're your enemies, okay? It's like, that doesn't sound like the God I believe in. Well, Marcion said, well, that's the Old Testament God. Later, there was a New Testament God, the one that Jesus preaches about love and compassion. So he said, that's the God you ought to follow. Forget the Old Testament God. So you can see he already kind of had some beliefs that were a little bit different. The idea that there's 2 gods, okay? But anyway, he did consider himself a Christian, and he had his own opinion, if you will, of what the canon should be. So let's take a look at Marcion's canon and see how different it was. Okay? Let's start with his gospel canon. All right? Now we know how many gospels we have, right? How many? 4. We have 4. All right, well, according to Marcion, how many did he have?
1.
He only accepted 1. And what gospel was that? It was the Gospel of Luke. So now I don't know the specifics, but for some reason he did not think that Matthew, Mark, or John should be included. He didn't accept them. Okay? What about the book of Acts? What did he think about it? See, Andrew?
He was debating between it.
Yeah, he was like, book of Acts, I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Okay? What about Paul's letters? R.C. Cola and George eating popcorn and Thess. What do you think about them? See, Morgan?
He accepted most of them,
Uh-huh.
but
Yeah.
he debated both the Timothy's and
Uh-huh, that's right. He accepted most of Paul's letters, but he didn't accept Tim Tye. Okay? And I think probably, if I remember correctly, I think he questioned whether Paul wrote those letters. So that goes to number 1. Was it the author, an apostle, or a close companion one? Well, his attitude was, well, I don't know if he wrote those letters. So he didn't accept them. What about the apostolic letters? You know, Hebrews, James, PJs. In fact, even the book of Revelation. Let's see, Sydney, what did he say about those?
He was debating on whether to.
Yeah, he questioned all of them. Okay, and again, I think it's probably, he was like, well, how do we know that Peter wrote those letters? How do we know it was the real John? Or even a companion of? I'm not accepting them. Okay? In Revelation, that book's weird. I'm not including that. Okay? So that was how he was. So you can see his Bible, quote unquote, was not very big. He only, what? I don't know, I haven't counted them, but what, 7 or 8, 9 books maybe? Okay, so his canon was very limited. Now, the second column is called the Muratorian Canon. And I'll give you a little story behind that. It's called Muratorian because there was a priest named Muratorius who in the Middle Ages found, hidden in this monastery, in this library, this ancient list. And they named it after him. Okay, it wasn't his list, but he found it. And they're like, hey, what's this? And it had a list of books, and it said these are the books that are the New Testament. All right? Now, so let's see how things changed. Look at the Muratorian Canon. How many Gospels did it accept? How many did it accept? See, Frankie?
He accepted all of them.
It accepted all 4 of them. How about the book of Acts? Did he accept it? Or whoever wrote it? Again, we don't even know who wrote it. Did it accept Acts? Yes, it did. In fact, if you look, it accepted a whole lot of the books. It took all of Paul's, but you can see it still rejected or debated some of the apostolic letters. Okay, so the list is growing. They're adding to it. There's more that are being accepted. That's right. Now, we're not going to go through every one of these columns, but if you'll look, Irenaeus and Tertullian and Origen, you notice these guys are accepting more and more of the books. Okay? Now, when you get over to the right-hand side of the column, you can see Eusebius. He was the first person to accept all of Paul's letters. He didn't accept a lot of the apostolic ones, but he did accept all of the Gospels and all of Paul's letters. So, again, the canon was growing. And if you look at Athanasius on the right-hand side, what do you notice about his canon? This is significant. This is significant. See Sydney again?
He accepted all.
All 27. So if you want to kind of say who was the person who helped us get our 27-book canon, I guess you would say Athanasius was the guy because he accepted them all. Okay? Now, if you look down the bottom, I want you to see that second section. There are a number of books that I'm sure you probably have either never heard of before or maybe just occasionally. They're called non-canonical books because they're not in the Bible. All right? They're not in any Bible. All right? Look at those. Shepherd of Hermas, Apocalypse of Peter, Wisdom of Solomon, the Didache, the Epistle of Barnabas, and then at the bottom you'll see the Acts of Paul. Okay? And you can see that most of these men either rejected them or they were kind of like, I don't know, maybe. Okay? Now, even though this chart says non-canonical, you can actually call these books something else. See if you were paying attention earlier. You actually could call all those books, use another word instead of non, because they are non-canonical because they're not in the canon, but we could use a better word than that. We could use a better word for these books that are not in the Bible. They're not in anybody's Bible. So they're not deuterocanonical. Sorry?
Deuteronomical or Jude?
No, you wouldn't call them that. They're not deuterocanonical means they're in someone's Bible.
Oh.
These are not in anybody's Bible, and we have a special word for that. They're just writings. They're out there. They're kind of floating around, but nobody wants to claim them. Hey, Riley?
Apocryphal?
Yes, they're apocryphal. That's exactly what they are. They're apocryphal writings. Okay. Now, there's one thing I want you to add to your chart here. It's the only thing that you actually need to add. Down at the bottom where it says Acts of Paul, you see that? I would like you to add the name Thecla. The name Thecla. So that it says the Acts of Paul and Thecla. And I wanted to share with you a little story and kind of use this as an example of why you get some of these apocryphal writings that exist, but why they're never going to make it into the Bible. In these writings, and again, a lot of these, you can go on the internet, and if you really want to see what they say, you can find them. But anyway, in the Acts of Paul and Thecla, Thecla was supposed to have been a young woman who lived in one of the cities that Paul was preaching to. You know, as he was traveling around the Roman Empire, preaching the gospel and trying to spread the church, there was this young noblewoman named Thecla who was engaged to get married to a wealthy nobleman. Okay? And according to these stories, Thecla heard Paul preaching to crowds of people, and she was really taken by his message. And one of the things that he was preaching was, he was telling people that they should forsake, this world that they live in and dedicate themselves completely to God. Forsaking marriage and family and dedicating themselves completely to God. So she decided that that's what she was going to do. She was going to take a vow of chastity and basically not get married and not have a family and basically dedicate herself to God. Well, according to these stories, Thecla's fiancé was not happy at all. He's like, what do you mean you're taking a vow of chastity? I thought we were getting married. She's like, oh no, I'm dedicating myself to God because Paul tells me I should. Okay? And her mom was upset because she wanted her daughter to marry this very wealthy young man and have a family. Okay? And she was upset. What are you doing, my daughter? Oh, I'm dedicating myself to God. So Thecla kind of becomes a disciple of Paul. And the two of them start traveling around and preaching together. Okay? Again, this is according to this story. All right? And in the stories, Thecla, there's so many people that are so enraged by her conversion that they try to harm her. They try to kill her. And in some of the stories, they try to kill her and she's protected by God. Like, they try to burn her at the stake and the flames don't hurt her. They throw her into an arena with wild beasts and the wild beasts won't hurt her. I mean, she can't be killed kind of thing. So, I mean, that's kind of a fantastic kind of story. But Thecla kind of becomes like this super sidekick to Paul. Okay? And, I mean, they're not romantically involved. I mean, they're just partners in trying to preach the gospel. Okay? So if you're like, well, I've never heard of this woman, well, you have to read the Acts of Paul and Thecla to hear about her. Okay? If you go into the letters of Paul that are in our Bible, I don't think she's mentioned at all. I mean, maybe the name might appear, but if I remember, I don't think it does. So this would go to, was this book accepted by lots of Christian communities? Well, in the case of that, it's like, where did that story come from? Okay, somebody wrote it, but it's not accepted. So you're never going to find the Acts of Paul and Thecla into our Bible. Okay? Now, last question I want to ask you, since we're talking about, hey, will that ever get into the canon? Will we ever see a new book added to our 27-book canon? Will that ever happen?
No.
It won't. Okay? The canon is completely closed. In fact, the church has kind of taught that the canon is completely closed and you'll never see another book added into our Bible. You'll also never see one taken out. The canon is set. 27 books in the New Testament, and then 46 in the Old, for a total of 73. Okay? Yes?
What if, they find, they had, do more research, and they find out that, one of the letters of, John was
Yeah, well, and people do research, and they do look for new things, but I can tell you that no matter what they find, it's not going to be put in the Bible. Okay? It's just not going to happen. Okay? All right, so hopefully you found that article interesting. That's how we got our New Testament, all right, so that you can be quizzed over it today, okay? So yeah. All right, so I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to give you your assignment.